Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Friday. Hope you've got a great weekend planned for yourselves. It is Todd McFarlane Day and we'll be looking back on some of his early stuff early on in his career. This is the Incredible Hulk, his first run at Marvel. This is issue 336, October 1987. Like I said, fairly early on in his career. So we're not going to be getting, as I said with last review, kind of the Todd McFarlane that we all know and love. We're getting kind of proto Todd McFarlane, I guess is what I'd call it. It's a McFarlane playing by the rules and playing by the Jim Shooter kind of edicts of storytelling from the mid-'80s. Again, not a household name, so as you can tell from this cover, not Todd McFarlane. It's signed Geiger and McLeod, so I'm not quite sure who that is. Fairly dynamic, serviceable cover. Nothing wrong with it, I would say. And hinting at the fact that Hulk will be fighting X-Factor in this issue. So not much more to be said about the cover. Let's crack her open, have a look inside at the Todd McFarlane art. Obviously not full Todd McFarlane art because he is being inked by someone else. It's a weird thing where some pages feel fairly familiar and Todd McFarlane-esque and others don't quite as much. One thing I have noticed though, not a lot of extreme angles in these early Todd McFarlane issues for Marvel. I don't know if that's because, again, of editorial rules and stuff, or just, you know, Todd McFarlane still kind of getting his footing, being a fairly early on his career and maybe not as developed as an artist and not yet doing those things that will become kind of synonymous with his name and kind of the image style as well. Still some pretty cool stuff nonetheless. On this first page, I talked about last review about his technology. You can definitely recognize it here, not quite as detailed as it would become, but a really good job. And I would say the inker actually, you know, helps with the technological elements where Todd McFarlane usually is a bit scratchier, more detailed and doing the chicken scratch inking. The inker here keeps all the technology pretty clean, concise, but also very intricate, which Todd McFarlane probably laid down in the pencils. So that's pretty cool. The profile shot of this guy here, I would say, is pretty much what we expect from Todd McFarlane. It's got that look, but as we move along throughout the comic, you'll see that kind of disappears here and there from page to page. So when we get here, I do recognize this definitely as a Todd McFarlane kind of splash. You know, he's doing the old alleyways with the boxes and the garbage cans and the debris and stuff. So that's fairly McFarlane-ish. The pose on the Hulk as well. Sometimes the awkward positioning and anatomy that is kind of a tick of his style, which I kind of learned to appreciate. Credits, we got Peter David Writer writing way too many words in this comic. Maybe these pages aren't representative of that, but you'll see later on. If I had started reading comics this early on, I might have, you know, gotten out of them just because of the amount of words that you got to read. I'm not against words in comics at all, but I do believe that generally the visuals should tell as much of the story as possible. And you know, if you have to start explaining things that aren't happening in the visuals and the writing and overwriting for that, that's kind of a problem. Comics are a visual medium. It should really start with the visuals. I've always preferred comics with lots of awesome visuals that tell the story and less narration and less dialogue for exposition and things like that maybe aren't being translated through the art, right? Todd McFarlane's the penciler. Jim Sanders 3 is the inker. Rick Parker letterer, and Petras Gatis or Scotezi, I'm not quite sure, is the colorist. I would say, you know, this mid-'80s Marvel coloring is fairly bland. A lot of kind of grays and browns and stuff, and not a lot of flashy colors. Everything's kind of muted and flat, and not my favorite period for comic book coloring, for sure. So as we go through the comic, I'll try to point out stuff that I think is, you know, clearly McFarlane, and other stuff where it kind of falls apart in as far as his style, and it starts to just look like kind of a random, mundane Marvel comic. So, you know, awkward positioning in this character here, definitely a McFarlane trope. And I think the alleyway here, even though inked by Jim Sanders the third, definitely is starting to resemble more of the noodly, kind of liney type of inking that McFarlane will become famous for later on. So I'm assuming a lot of this is being laid down in the pencils, and of course we'll get more and more of that as he progresses throughout his career. So talked about the storytelling early on. Again, you'll notice as we go through this, basically just, you know, flat kind of shots, no down shots, no up shots, or very few anyways, and those always help to make things more dynamic. So again, kind of still a Jim Shooter style storytelling going on here. I do think though McFarlane's always been good at setting the scene and adding lots of detail in this kind of what could be a very boring apartment shot. Not that this is the most exciting apartment shot I've ever seen, but, you know, I do appreciate the fact that there's a couple of bottles, an open pizza box here, you know, some leftover TV dinner, a little radio, lots of nice little details that fill the world and give us a convincing setting. This is kind of characteristic of McFarlane, right? And we'll see more of this, again, as he moves along throughout his career, all the debris and the explosions and the rocks and stuff. You know, even though it's inked by someone else here, it still has kind of a distinctive McFarlane feel. McFarlane, excuse me. Here's where we get introduced to X Factor. Obviously, back in the day, you assume that if you're reading Hulk, you're not necessarily reading X Factor. You don't necessarily know the characters. So kind of a quick introduction to the three main characters of X Factor anyways. I guess Beast isn't in this issue, and giving us just a little rundown of who they are and what their powers are. One thing I think early on was distinctive about McFarlane is this particular way he draws thighs and legs, so we can see it definitely here on Iceman, where the face and the upper body kind of just resembles any old Marvel house style. I do see a lot of McFarlane in the way and the size and the way he draws thighs and things like that. It's a weird detail, but these faces definitely very McFarlane as well. Maybe not so much Cyclops, but these two just done in a much more clean kind of inking style. But I do recognize his look there. And these are the pages that I'm just going to kind of go through because there's not a lot of exciting artwork to look at, to be honest. And man, does Peter David just love, I don't want to say the sound of his own voice, but maybe the sound of his own pencil at that point, or his own typewriter, maybe before people were writing on computers, right? Yeah, just way too much dialogue here. And looking at these two pages, just not interested in reading any of it, to be honest. The characters, it's kind of funny because it's the mid-'80s, so you can tell from the hair, and the hairstyles on all the characters, right? Also, we get these, what I've ascertained is basically copied from Arthur Adams. Arthur Adams was kind of the first to do this checkerboard kind of background hatching. McFarlane does it, and Rob Liefeld does it as well during this period, or a little bit later, right? Early 90s. And they've you know, no shame in it. They've always professed that they looked at what Art Adams did and took a lot of that into their own artwork. But yeah, these pages and pages of characters just talking, and I feel like McFarlane's kind of losing interest too, to a certain extent, because these are the pages where I feel where maybe he didn't put so much work into his pencils, and the characters look less distinctively McFarlane, and the inker maybe is putting a bit more of his style into those. And we'll go through quickly again all of these dialogue pages because they're just not that interesting, to be honest. The layout, the panel work as well, pretty Marvel house style. At that time, none of the crazy layouts and layering that we'll get used to with McFarlane later on, but he's expressed in many interviews, you know, he started off that way, and slowly every issue he would add little flourishes of what he felt should be done, and slowly but surely, I guess after a while, the fans noticed, the people reading the comics, and that's how he rose to fame and became a very popular artist. And the editors, I guess, just over time didn't notice it. And, you know, I guess if sales were going up and up and up, editors would not be complaining to the artist to start changing things. Even though there's those legendary stories of, for example, Tom DeFalco asking Todd to stop drawing the Spider-Man webbing spaghetti. He called it the spaghetti webbing, right? The distinctive way McFarlane would draw it. And then I just see things like this one panel here to me is so McFarlane in its crop, the fact that it's a vertical panel, right? And again, just the line work, even though inked by someone else, I see a bit more McFarlane coming out just in this particular panel here, as opposed to basically every other panel on this page, except for maybe this one here. This feels distinctly McFarlane, just with kind of an 80s Marvel house style inking on top. I mean, to be honest, even though it's Todd McFarlane's art, I'm just not that interested in even finding out what the story's about. A lot of characters just kind of meeting up and talking. Just not my thing. Especially for a superhero comic, you know, I feel like it's the writer really trying to, you know, get their stuff in and kind of forgetting that this is a visual medium, and you got to, as McFarlane said, excite the kids who are reading the books. Very McFarlane face here, helped out by Jim Sanders. Tom McFarlane's never been known to draw the best women. Not that he's horrible at it, but I definitely feel like Sanders is helping him out here a little bit as to soften up the visage of this lady here. And finally, we get to a bit more action. When we get the Hulk, you'll see as we go through next few kind of Hulk issues, you'll see the Hulk kind of transform and become bigger and more monstrous. That brow will grow to huge size. And once McFarlane starts inking himself as well, it's going to look, to me, at least a lot more exciting than what we're getting here. I feel like, and it's been pointed out, that there's some stuff that McFarlane was kind of swiping from earlier Hulk runs by John Byrne. So sometimes when I see something like this, I really feel like this is, you could almost mistake this whole panel as a John Byrne drawing. So maybe he swiped that somewhere. There's some actual examples you can look at online. There's the Comic Swipe group on Facebook as well, where you can go and see a lot of those. But I definitely feel like, if I had to guess, this is maybe lifted from a John Byrne panel somewhere. I could be wrong. Some interesting production stuff. We're still getting lots of interesting screen tones. How effective they are, I don't know. But again, the general look of the colors in the comics are just very muted and gray. Every once in a while you get a flourish of yellow, which kind of pops out and helps. But man, the coloring on this is just not helping the book at all, in my opinion. And I do feel that even within just kind of the traditional form of panels and layout and storytelling, McFarlane is still trying a little bit to change it up already, not layering those panels yet and doing the crazy layouts and border panels that he's known for, using, you know, Spider-Man's web as a border panel or a phone cord as he's done on his Spider-Man run. But he's still trying, you know, these two panels could have been just, you know, the same size, cut down the middle, but he's moving one over to the left, making this one a bit wider, giving us a kind of more cinema style kind of panel here. Cinematic is the word I was looking for. And I think, honestly, probably our first upshot right here of the whole book, which instantly helps to make this panel at least more dynamic, I feel, as opposed to these ones, and our first downshot here of the whole book. So, you know, slowly but surely, I guess he'll be incorporating those into his art. But yeah, pretty just basic kind of, you know, typical superhero comic where heroes meet and some are at odds for some reason and are fighting. Obviously the Hulk in this gray iteration is a bit smarter, but he's kind of an asshole. Basically, he's defined that way. So, you know, kind of maybe more in the anti-hero mold. And I mean, the Hulk all across his career has pretty much been more of an anti-hero or a monster than an actual hero, I would say. Yeah, not much to write home about on this one. We get one last really cool page that I feel is very McFarlane. It's a good downshot. Not quite sure about the inking on these faces. I feel like Sanders isn't necessarily helping out what McFarlane laid down here. I feel if McFarlane inked this himself, it would look cooler. But again, just like I said early on in the issue, all this great tech is definitely McFarlane style, right? Very intricate, lots of little parts and stuff. Lots of line work, but cleaned up a little bit more so than when McFarlane would do it because of the Jim Sanders inks. And you know, I think this works really well here and looks pretty cool, even though ultimately, you know, it probably looks even better when McFarlane does it himself. But I think this works really well here. And he's starting to do that thing where he's giving us some foreground elements that are really close to us, really big, to help layer the scene and create those different planes, right? The three basic ones: foreground, middle ground over here, and background back here. I will say on this page, I do feel like the colors are helping that effect, right? So we've got more saturated, darker colors in the foreground, and as we move back, they tend to get less saturated in the middle ground and even less in the background there. Very cool issue. So the background obviously could just kind of colored as one flat color, helps to push it back. And then the middle ground here has elements, boop, boop, little bits of greens and I guess those are greens or yellows to differentiate them a little bit from the background. And then the darker saturated colors for the foreground. This, I would say, is probably the most successful illustration in this comic. That is the happiest looking Wolverine I have ever seen. You could almost believe he's like just a nice kind of happy-go-lucky guy here, even though he's got claws coming out of his hands. Not quite sure who drew this, but definitely, you know, a style that's aimed more at young kids and rather than making Wolverine look like a cool badass, right? That he was back in the day. Talking about anti-heroes, you know, Wolverine was definitely one of the first, right? With the Punisher, and maybe Luke Cage in the 70s, right? It was that first wave of anti-heroes. So there you go, guys. That is my review of the Incredible Hulk 336. Obviously looking at it only for the Todd McFarlane art. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you're still subscribed and you're still hanging around and checking out the videos, thank you so much. If you are not subscribed, please do so below. It really helps us out, really helps the channel grow, helps get us out there to other people who are into comic books just like we are. So thank you guys, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.